Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a continuity error. Due to technical difficulties, I actually accidentally deleted chapter 19, so I'm going to go back and reread it. Chapter 19, Outside 217. Danny was remembering the words of someone else who had worked at the Overlook during the season. Her saying she had seen something in one of the rooms where a bad thing happened. That was in room 217, and I want you to promise me you won't go in there, Danny. Steer right clear. I've read this chapter twice. I read this part twice, so. It was a perfectly ordinary door, no different from any other door on the first two floors of the hotel. It was dark gray, halfway down a corridor that ran at right angles to the main second floor hallway. The numbers on the door looked no different from the house numbers on the Boulder apartment building they had lived in. A 2, a 1, and a 7. Big deal. Below them, just below them, was a tiny glass circle, a peephole. Danny had tried several of them. From the inside, you got a wide fisheye view of the corridor. From outside, you could screw your eye up 7 ways to Sunday and still not see a thing. A dirty jip. Why are you here? After the walk beyond the overlook, he and Mommy had come back and she had fixed him his favorite lunch, a cheese and bologna sandwich plus Campbell's bean soup. They ate in Dick's kitchen and talked. The radio was on, thin and crackly. Getting thin and crackly music from the Estes Park station. The kitchen was his favorite place in the hotel, and he guessed that Mommy and Daddy must feel the same way, because after trying their meals in the dining room for 3 days or so, they had begun eating in the kitchen by mutual consent, setting up chairs around Dick Halloran's butcher block, which was almost as big as their dining room table back in Stovington anyway. I'm sorry, I'm having to do it on my other tray, which is wobbly. I'm having to readjust the book every 5 seconds. The dining room had been too depressing, even with the lights on and the music playing from the tape cassette system in the office. You were still just one of the 3 people sitting at a table surrounded by dozens of other tables, all empty, all covered with those transparent plastic dust cloths. Mommy said it was like having dinner in the middle of a Horace Walpole novel, and Daddy had laughed and agreed. Danny had no idea who Horace Walpole was, but he did know that Mommy's cooking had begun to taste better as soon as they began to eat it in the kitchen. He kept discovering little flashes of Dick Halloran's personality lying around, and they reassured him with a warm touch. Mommy had eaten half a sandwich, no soup. She said Daddy must have gone out for a walk of his own since both the VW and the hotel truck were still in the parking lot. She said she was tired and might lay down for an hour or so, if he thought he could amuse himself and not get into trouble. Danny told her around a mouthful of cheese and bologna that he thought he could. Why don't you go out into the playground? She asked him. I thought you loved that place with the sandbox for your trucks and all. He swallowed, and the food went down his throat in a lump that was trying hard. Maybe I will, he said, turning to the radio and fiddling with it. And all those neat hedge animals, she said, taking his empty plate. Your father's got to get out and trim them pretty soon. Yeah, he said, just nasty things. Once it had to do with those damn hedges clipped to look like animals. If you see your father before I do, tell him I'm lying down. Sure, Mom. She put the dishes in the sink and came back over to him. I'm looking ahead just to be sure. Are you happy here, Danny? He looked at her guilelessly, a milk mustache on his lip. Uh-huh. No more bad dreams? No. Tony had come to him once, one night while he was lying in bed, calling his name faintly and from far away. Danny had squeezed his eyes tightly shut until Tony had gone. You sure? Yes, Mom. She seemed satisfied. How's your hand? He flexed it for her. All better. She nodded. Uh, Jack had taken the nest under the Pyrex bowl, full of frozen wasps, out to the incinerator in back of the equipment shed and burned it. There had been no more wasps since then. He had written to a lawyer in Boulder, enclosing the snaps of Danny's hand, and the lawyer had called back 2 days ago. That had put Jack in a foul temper all afternoon. Oh boy. The lawyer doubted if the company that had manufactured the bug bomb could be sued successfully, because there was only Jack to testify that he had followed directions printed on the package. Jack had asked the lawyer if they couldn't purchase some others and test them with the same effect. Yes, the lawyer said, but the results were highly doubtful, even if all the test bombs malfunctioned. He told Jack of a case that involved an extension ladder company and a man who had broken his back. Crossover from Apt Pupil, another of Stephen King's novels. I like that. Nice touch there. Wendy had commiserated with Jack, but privately she had just been glad that Danny had gotten off as cheaply as he had. It was best to leave lawsuits to people who understood them, and that did not include the Twinses. And they had seen no more wasps since. Go and play, Doc. Have fun. But he hadn't had fun. He had wandered aimlessly around the hotel, poking into the maids' closets and the janitor's rooms, looking for something interesting, not finding it. A small boy paddling around a dark blue carpet woven with twisting black lines. He had tried a room door from time to time, but of course they were all locked. The passkey, let's move it a little closer here, I don't know. 169 is my page number. Let's move it closer here. Sorry. I want to lean back because my back hurts. Alright. I don't know how well you can hear me from here. Hope you can hear me okay. But of course they were all locked. The passkey was hanging down in the office. He knew where, but Daddy had told him he shouldn't touch that. And he didn't want to, did he? Why are you here? There was nothing aimless about it after all. He had been drawn to room 217 by a morbid kind of curiosity. He remembered a story that Daddy had read to him once when he was drunk. That had been a long time ago, but the story was just as vivid now as when Daddy had read it to him. Mommy had scolded Daddy and asked him what he was doing, reading a 3-year-old baby something so horrible. The name of the story was Bluebeard. I'm thinking ahead because I've already read this. That was clear to his mind, too, because he had thought at first Daddy was saying bluebird, but there were no bluebirds in the story, or birds of any kind for that matter. Actually, the story was about Bluebird's wife, a pretty lady that had corn-colored hair like Mommy. After Bluebird, ah, After Bluebird married her, they lived in a big and ominous castle that was not unlike the Overlook. And every day Bluebeard went off to work, and every day he would tell his pretty little wife not to look in a certain room, although the key to that room was hanging right on a hook, just like the passkey was hanging on the office wall downstairs. Bluebeard's wife had got more and more curious about the locked room. She tried to peep through the keyhole the way Danny had tried to look through room 217's peephole with similar unsatisfying results. There was even a picture of her getting down on her knees and trying to look under the door, but the crack wasn't wide enough. The door swung wide, and the old fairy tale book had depicted her discovery in ghastly, loving detail. The image was burned on Danny's mind. The severed heads of Bluebeard's 7 previous wives were in the room, each one on its own pedestal, the eyes turned up to whites, the mouths unhinged and gaping in silent screams. They were somehow balanced on necks ragged from the broadsword's decapitating swing, and there was blood running down the pedestals. Terrified, she had turned to flee from the room in the castle, only to discover Bluebeard standing in the doorway, his terrible eyes blazing. "I told you not to enter this room," Bluebeard said, unsheathing his sword. "Alas, in your curiosity, You were like the other 7. And though I loved you best of all, your ending shall be as was theirs. Prepare to die, wretched woman. Yeah, there's no emotion there. Have to. It seemed vaguely to Danny. Excuse me. It seemed vaguely to Danny that the story had had a happy ending. What? Really? Okay. Whatever you say. But that had oh wait, never mind. I guess that wasn't the ending. But that had paled to insignificance beside the 2 dominant images. The taunting, maddening locked door with some great secret behind it, and the grisly secret itself, repeated more than half a dozen times. The locked door, and behind it the heads, the severed heads. His hand reached out and stroked the room's doorknob almost furtively. Excuse me, furtively. He had no idea how long he had been here, standing hypnotized before the bland gray locked door. And maybe 3 times I thought I've seen some things, nasty things. But Mr. Halloran, Dick, had also said he didn't think those things could hurt you. They were like scary pictures in a book, that was all. And maybe he wouldn't see anything. On the other hand, he plunged his left hand into his pocket and it came out holding the passkey. It had been there all along, of course. Of course. He held it by the square metal tab on the end which had "Office" printed on it in magic marker. He twirled the key on its chain, watching it go around and around. After several minutes of this, he stopped and slipped the passkey into the lock. It slid in smoothly with no hitch, as if it had wanted to be there all along. I thought I've seen things, nasty things. Promise me you won't go in there. I promise. And a promise was, of course, very important. Still, his curiosity itched at him maddeningly, as poison ivy in a place you aren't supposed to scratch. But it was a dreadful kind of curiosity, the kind that makes you peek through your fingers during the scariest parts of a scary movie. What was beyond that door would be no movie. I don't think those things can hurt you, like scary pictures in a book. Suddenly he reached out with his left hand, not sure of what it was going to do until it had removed the passkey and stuffed it back into his pocket. He stared at the door a moment longer, blue-gray eyes wide, and then turned quickly and walked back down the corridor toward the main hallway that ran at right angles to the corridor he was in. Oh boy. Something made him pause there, and he wasn't sure what for a moment. Then he remembered that directly around this corner, on the way back to the stairs, there was one of those old-fashioned fire extinguishers curled up against the wall, curled there like a dozing snake. They weren't chemical-type extinguishers at all, Daddy had said, although there were several of those in the kitchen. These were the forerunner of the modern sprinkler systems. It's so descriptive, man. Just listen to this. The long canvas hoses hooked directly into the Overlook's plumbing system, and by turning a single valve you could become a one-man fire department. Daddy said that the chemical extinguishers which sprayed foam or CO2 were much better. The chemical smothered fires took away the oxygen they needed to burn, while a high-pressure spray might just spread the flames around. What? I hear it. Daddy said that Mr. Ullman should replace the old-fashioned hoses right along with the old-fashioned boiler. But Mr. Ullman would probably do neither because he was a cheapskate. Danny knew that this was one of the worst epithets his father could summon. It was applied to certain doctors, dentists, and appliance repairmen, and also to the head of his English department at Stovington. who had disallowed some of Daddy's book orders because he said the books would put them over budget. Over budget. He had fumed to Wendy. Danny had been listening from his bedroom where he was supposed to be asleep. He's just saving the last $500 for himself. Cheapskate. Danny looked around the corner. The fire extinguisher was there, a flat hose folded back a dozen times on itself, the red tank attached to the wall. Above it was an axe in a glass case like a museum exhibit. There's a big difference between the movie and the book.
Yeah.
Instead of a mallet, there's an axe.
Yeah. Which,
No, he used the axe in the movie, didn't he? He
I
used
think so.
he uses the mallet in the book. Yeah. Oops. Kinda spoiled the book, but wait, we don't know who's using the mallet yet. Alright, let's keep going here. Oh well. Kinda know what's gonna happen. He's gonna go axe murder. It teases. Don't worry about it. It's not that hard to figure out. The extinguisher was there, a flat hose folded back a dozen times on itself, the red tank attached to the wall. Above it was an axe in a glass case like a museum exhibit, with white words printed on a red background. In case of emergency, break glass. Danny could read the word emergency, which was also the name of one of his favorite TV shows, but was unsure of the rest. But he didn't like the way the word was used in connection with that long flat hose. Emergency was fire, explosions, car crashes, hospital, sometimes death. And he didn't like the way that hose had... What? Go back. Hung. Didn't like the way that hose hung. Read that wrong. There so blandly on the wall. When he was alone, he always skittered past these extinguishers as fast as he could. No particular reason, it just felt better to go fast. It felt safer. Dun dun dun. I know. I have to make it interactive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just more fun. It's more of a personal thing. Oh, it's Al Pacino. That was Al Pacino. What is this? Hold on. I gotta see his commercial. No. What is this? 2 for the money. Alright. Now, heart thumping loudly in his chest, he came around the corner and looked down the hall past the extinguisher and the stairs. Mommy was down there sleeping, and if Daddy was back from his walk, he would probably be sitting in the kitchen, eating a sandwich and reading a book. He would just walk right past that old extinguisher and go downstairs. Daddy's not walking, he's going through a boring history thing. I didn't even read it. I skipped through it and summarized it. Took me an hour to get through it. I was reading it. Took me an hour. Where'd I go?
Alright, guys, I'm gonna get the kids. We'll leave about 4 o'clock. I'll find time to get the living room cleaned up before I go.
He started towards it, moving closer to the far wall until his right arm was brushing the expensive silk paper. 20 steps away, 15 a dozen. When he was 10 steps away, the brass nozzle suddenly rolled off the fat loop it had been lying, sleeping, on, and fell to the hall carpet with a dull thump. That scared me to death, coming out of that hook like that. Oh man, I'd lose it. It lay there, the dark bore of its muzzle pointing at Danny. Should be. Oh boy. He stopped immediately, his shoulders twitching forward with the suddenness of his scare. His blood thumped thickly in his ears and temples. His mouth had gone dry and sour, his hands curled into fists. Yet the nozzle of the hose only lay there, its brass casing glowing mellowly. A loop of a loop of flat canvas leading back up to the red painted frame bolted to the wall. Oh, so it had fallen off. So what? It was only a fire extinguisher, nothing else. It was stupid to think that it looked like some poisoned snake from Wild World of Animals that had hurt him and woken up. Even if the stitched canvas did look a little bit like scales. He would just step over it and go down the hall to the stairs, walking a little bit fast maybe, to make sure it didn't snap out after him and curl around his foot. Oh boy. He wiped his lips with his left hand in unconscious imitation of his father and took a step forward. No movement from the hose. Another step, nothing. There, see how stupid you are. You get all worked up thinking about that dumb room and that dumb Bluebeard story, and that hose was probably ready to fall off for the last 5 years, that's all. Right? Uh, Danny stared at the hose on the floor and thought of wasps. 8 steps away, the nozzle of the hose gleamed peacefully at him from the rug as if to say, "Don't worry, I'm just a hose, that's all. And even if that isn't all, what I do to you won't be much worse than a bee sting. Or a wasp sting. What would I want to do to a nice little boy like you? Except bite, and bite, and bite." Danny took another step, and another. His breath was dry and harsh in his throat. Panic was close now. He began to wish the hose would move. Then at last he would know. He would be sure. He took another step, and now he was within striking distance. But it's not going to strike at you, he thought hysterically. How could it strike at you, bite at you, when it's just a hose? Maybe it was full of wasps, or maybe it's full of wasps. His internal temperature plummeted to 10 below zero. That's pretty accurate for 5. He stared at the black bore in the center of the nozzle, nearly hypnotized. Maybe it was full of wasps. Secret wasps. Their brown bodies bloated with poison so full of autumn poison that it dripped from their stingers in clear drops of fluid. Suddenly, he knew that he was nearly frozen with terror. If he did not make his feet go now, they would become locked to the carpet and he would stay here, staring at the black hole in the center of the brass nozzle like a bird staring at a snake. He would stay here until his daddy found him, and then what would happen? With a high moan, he made himself run. As he reached the hose, some trick of the light made the nozzle seem to move, to revolve as if to strike, and he leaped high into the air above it. In his panicky state, it seemed that his legs pushed him nearly all the way to the ceiling, that he could feel the stiff back hairs that formed his cowlick brushing the hallway's plaster ceiling, although later he knew that couldn't have been so. He came down on the other side of the hose and ran, and suddenly he heard it behind him, coming for him, the soft dry wicker of that brass snake's head as it slithered rapidly along the carpet after him, like a rattlesnake moving swiftly through the dry field of grass. It was coming for him. And suddenly the stairs seemed very far away. They seemed to retreat a running step into the distance for each running step he took toward them. "Daddy!" he tried to scream, but his closed throat would not allow a word to pass. He was on his own. Behind him, the sound grew louder, the dry sliding sound of the snake slipping swiftly over the carpet's dry hackles. Great, he's putting tongue twisters in here now. Oh, oh okay. If you say so. At his heels now, perhaps rising up with clear poison dribbling from its brass snout. Danny reached the snares and had to pinwheel his arms crazily for balance. For one moment it seemed sure that he would cartwheel over and go head for heels to the bottom. He threw a glance back over his shoulder. The hose had not moved. It lay as it had lain, one loop off the frame, the brass nozzle on the hall floor, the nozzle pointing disinterestedly away from him. "You see, stupid," he berated himself. "You made it all up, scaredy cat. It was all in your imagination. Scaredy cat, scaredy cat." Can't take that line seriously. He clung to the stairway railing, his legs trembling in reaction. "It never chased you," his mind told him, and seized on that thought, played it back. "Never chased you, never chased you, never did, never did." It was nothing to be afraid of. Why, he could go back and put that hose right into its frame if he wanted to. He could, but he didn't think he would. Because what if it had chased him and had gone back when he saw it and couldn't when it saw that it couldn't quite catch him? The hose lay on the carpet, almost seeming to ask if he would like to come back and try again. Panting, Danny ran downstairs.